Hi, welcome to Conversations with Hannah. I'm joined here today by two friends, and one who's still a colleague in the legislature with me, and one who has sadly moved on, but is doing great things in the private sector again. And we wanted to get together, and I asked you two to join me today because we spent so much time working together representing Westboro, which was a town that the three of us each had a portion of. Representative Danielle Gregoire, who is from Marlboro initially. You had two precincts, or still have them, at least for the next few months. Representative Carolyn Dykema, now former representative, had one precinct, and you hail from Holliston and represented that area as well. And then I have and will have for another couple months precincts 4 and 5 in Westboro. And after November, when we get sworn again, I will only sadly have precinct 4 in Westboro. But wanted to talk about what it's been like to work together, and also just a little bit about what it's like to be a woman legislator at the State House and some of the things. And then we've also worked together on legislation that finally just got passed into law and signed by the governor that we're really proud of. So thought we could talk about that a little bit too. But why don't we open it up by Danielle, tell us your background. Tell for the folks who are watching at home a little bit about yourself.
So I was one of those people who said I never wanted to be two things, a lawyer and a politician. And here we are, however many years later, and I am, in fact, both. So I was working at the State House as a legislative aide, having graduated from college during a federal hiring freeze. I always wanted to be in federal law enforcement, and that didn't pan out. And so I was working at the State House, and I decided to go to law school in the evening, so I did that. And then when my boss at the time decided to leave to move on, it was an interesting time politically. It was 2008 when now former President Obama was first running. And the scene in Marlboro was a little bit different than it is now. And I kind of just figured I'd be out of a job come January anyway, so I might as well take a stab at it. And that's sort of how we arrived at where we are today. And I've been serving in the legislature mostly since 2009 when I was first sworn in.
And this session, you're serving as the chair of bonding and capital expenditures and state issues.
That's right. So we worked a lot this session on all that federal influx of money, whether it was the ARPA money, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Plan, or whether it was the infrastructure money that we were sent, over $11 billion from the federal government. So a lot of work has gone into all of that this session, in addition to the normal issues that committee would face.
Yeah, you and your staff are quite busy. And as most things happen, it all sort of comes down to the last few months, too, when things get insane. So literally we just see you passing in the hallway.
I was doing a lot of running around.
Room to room. And you, my friend, left us in February.
I did, and I miss you. I miss you both a lot.
Tell us.
It's great to be here.
You came in, was it 2008?
So I was just thinking, as Danielle was saying, we were classmates, Danielle and I. We came in 2008. So it was a while. So I was in the legislature for 13 years. And as you said, just recently, it was a hard decision, but decided to move back to the private sector where I had been before I got this job. So now I'm working in solar energy, which is very kind of a passion project for me. It's something that, both the environmental and the energy space has always been really a big part of my legislative career. So now I get to spend even more time kind of on the other side of the table, taking the policy that's put in place at the state level and at the federal level, and then turning that into actual projects on the ground and creating clean energy for our future. So it's great.
You spent a lot of time on the Telecommunications and Energy Committee, and then you were chair of Environment, Natural Resources, and Agriculture. So you have a lot of background in all of the issues that you're working on now, too, from a policy perspective. But it is, as Danielle noted when she pulled in, she saw the back of your car. You have a bike rack now because, as you said, you now have your weekends back to do things like that. So it's probably quite an adjustment going from the pace. I guess COVID served as somewhat of a downtime to get used to it, but you sort of pre-COVID, we didn't have a lot of nights and weekends that were free, and so I think that is certainly a benefit of going back into the private sector too, is having a little bit more certainty and control
about the schedule.
Your time.
I think a lot of people don't recognize being in public office, kind of what that means for your personal schedule. And I know that both of you are out. It's really a 24/7 job. You're always on the clock. If constituents need you or if an issue comes up, you have to be there. A lot of community events on the weekends. So all that was great, and great to spend time with both of you on the weekends, but it definitely is nice to have a little downtime again and do some biking and hiking and other passion things that I enjoy doing.
That's awesome. And, we, when you were still in the legislature, we used to tell everyone that we were the only all-female bipartisan delegation in the Commonwealth, and we had a lot of fun with that. I think Westboro, years past, was a little bit frustrated that they had so many different representatives until we told them to rethink sort of that, no, it's great. You have 3 women like on both sides of the aisle advocating for you. And we were fortunate to work together in Westboro, which is a great community, a lot of really civic-minded professional people involved in state government, in local government. And also it gave us the opportunity to do a lot of the fun events together in Westboro. I know a couple of years ago we did a banner and we walked in the 300th anniversary parade together. That was a very hot day. I think by the end we all weren't looking our best at that moment.
True.
But
this is true.
But there was just, Westboro is a town that has they do a nice job really celebrating the important things, especially around Veterans Day and Memorial Day, which are days that mean a lot to all 3 of us. They do a nice job, but it also meant that we had a lot of opportunity to spend together in support of the community. What were some of your favorite memories, Carolyn, of Westboro and the time that we had together there?
Well, there were a lot because there were many years. I think, I know that it may not be one of your favorite memories, but I always really enjoyed and got a lot of satisfaction out of the way that we coordinated for our regular briefings to the town. The select board would call us in to kind of let them know what's going on at the State House, and I just felt like we were really able to show the town what kind of good coordinated advocacy looked like. We were all kind of had our areas that we focused on, where we had our strengths, and we were able to bring that together in a way that I like to think it was very visible and obvious to the town, not only that we were covering the interests that were important and crucial to the town's functioning, but also that we were able to kind of integrate and create synergies amongst the 3 of us that actually, sort of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts there, I think. And I think we really brought that to Westboro. And then, of course, just the legislative, working together on legislation, that we were able to kind of bring both sides, both, political parties kind of to the table and show, I think particularly in this political time, when it seems so hard to have conversations, with a lot of people, whether it be across parties or just kind of generally in the community. I really enjoyed, hopefully, setting a tone and showing what good communication looks like, what respectful, civic-minded communication looks like. And if there's anything that I hope that I left before I left the legislature is sort of a reputation for having done that, and hopefully inspiring at least one young person. I know we talked to a lot of Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, and maybe somewhere along the way we left that impression.
I think we did, and I think too what I always sort of was amused at is people loved it when all 3 of us could be there, but when only one of us could cover something because other towns had things going on, we were sort of universally accepted as like the person to be there at the moment. It didn't matter which one of us was there because they knew that we had such a tight connection and collaborated so well that if they were telling one of us one thing, they were essentially telling all of us something. And that happened a lot of times. And Danielle, I know you and I tried to do the turkey trot together a couple times, but that was very early in the morning.
I had an interesting period where I was very into the 5K and I did a couple of half marathons, and I actually had a bib for the Boston Marathon the year that COVID happened, and I think that the pandemic was sort of the universe's way of telling me that I had no business trying to run the Boston Marathon. But it's a great event. My problem is I definitely fully admit to being a fair weather 5K'er, and it seems to have been freezing every single year. I mean, you can have some sort of nice weather there in November around Thanksgiving sometimes, but that never really happened with the Westboro one. So unfortunately, we didn't. But they make a nice shirt, I'll tell you. I wear those shirts all the time.
I love the shirts.
My daughter has my shirt, and she loves
my son took mine. I love them. They're the best shirts.
No, they're awesome. I love them. Like, I'll still probably sign up for it even if I don't go, just to get that shirt.
What other memories come to mind of the last couple of years of working together?
Yeah, I just think, to your point, it was so vital for us to demonstrate, because I guess I would understand the frustration of someone who comes from a community that they see as split. And, you know, if they have an issue with unemployment or the RMV or whatever their issue is, and they reach out to one of us and they feel like they're being pawned off on another because we don't want to, you know, we want to make sure that the constituencies are being served by their representative. But I always think having 3 voices is better than having 1, right? And it's that way you have 3 votes on anything. I mean, not that 3 votes is going to get you anywhere, but 3 votes is better than 1, and 3 voices is better than 1, and everyone works differently stylistically, and I think that, to your point earlier, you know, everyone's strengths get brought out, and it's a timing thing, and we did work so well together, and I think that people realized that by the end. And it's not the end, you know, we're still staying, and you're still with us, you know, you're not.
You're on vacation.
Sometimes in the legislature we say when you're out, but I mean, we're going to keep bringing you back in, but I just think now that the run, I guess, of our little team is over, I think people really have been very appreciative of the work that we've done. And it's really nice to hear, because let's be honest, we don't often hear that, right, in this job. 9 times out of 10, we're not hearing a thank you and that's not why we do the work, but it's still nice to hear it sometimes. Yeah. But yeah, I think just the general working so well together and just really doing a lot for this town. I mean, we've passed several home rule petitions, which you would think should be easy thing to do at the state level, and it's not always the case. So, and we've had some particularly thorny ones as well. So I think, you know, I've told Northborough as well, because I'm not going to represent Northborough anymore either, but I will always keep a part of the town in my heart, and if there's ever a need for anything, I'm going to be happy to help out. But obviously the focus will be on my district, which will now contain more of Marlborough than it used to, and a little bit of the city of Framingham, which is a whole nother learning curve for me that I'm doing over there.
And that is part of the challenge is, you know, every 10 years after the census is done, we then in the legislature go through a redistricting process to make sure that everyone's district is appropriately sized. We all have approximately the same number of constituents, plus or minus a little bit. And because of the growth in this area, we knew coming into redistricting that none of us could absorb the growth. So your district, as it got redistricting, will no longer have a piece of Westboro. You're losing the 1 precinct, and it's focusing in some other towns for whoever's going to get elected in November. And the district for you changed in that you're losing your 2 precincts in Westboro, and as you said, losing Northborough, but picking up Framingham, and then are you getting any of Southborough? No. So Marlborough and Framingham. And then I have had 2 precincts in Westboro, but I couldn't keep both, sadly, and so I will only have precinct 4 after
and the town actually grew a precinct. It used to be 5, and now it will be 6.
Yes, yep.
So yeah, just the tremendous growth out here, basically anywhere pretty well west of 128, and it was really a challenge to work that map. And but you know, I think it's important that we point out for the viewers at home that, you know, the term gerrymandering gets thrown about a lot, and really, you know, the committee that does this has it down to a science. It's the same committee that did it 10 years ago. We were the only state in the nation that didn't have a lawsuit filed against it for its new map proposal. And when it comes down to it, they put the numbers in the computer spits out a couple of plans, and you kind of move things around to nuance them a teeny tiny little bit, but there's not a ton of room for movement. So it's a really scientific process, you know, at least now. I can't say that it's always been that way, and it's always been a flawless process, but it's a very scientific process, and I think the folks at home should be really comfortable with the way the process was undertaken.
Well, like you said, Danielle, I think, you know, you particularly notice the changes in areas that have grown, right? And I think in some ways that's a testament to all of the good work that the towns out in Metro West have done, right? They're just really popular places to live, great schools, great quality of life, and that's reflected in the numbers. And then when you go to crunch the numbers for redistricting, when every district has to have the same, you know, 42,000 people, sort of just do the math, and you have to, you know,
well,
make
once
some of
one
these
thing
changes.
changes, it has a cascading effect on everything else. So you can't just be like, okay, we'll just get rid of, you know, Hannah's precinct 5. Neither of your districts could have absorbed it. So because of the growth around here, it had a lot of corresponding impacts on how districts were. And but I agree with you, Danielle. I think the process has been very well done the last couple of cycles. And as legislators, you know, I think we unanimously or nearly unanimously voted on it as well, which shows again that the towns and the folks who represent them have felt heard in the process, and that has worked out for everybody. We were talking earlier, to the Women's Caucus of legislators. We had our highest number yet at the beginning of this session. We were at 64 women, which was out of the 200-member legislature. And not only has our wonderful friend and colleague left us, but so have a number of other women who were great colleagues. Probably the most prominent one is our friend Claire Cronin, who is now the ambassador to Ireland. And then we lost another colleague, Lori Ehrlich, who went to work as a regional director for FEMA. We lost another colleague, Maria Robinson, who was a Metro West Central Mass colleague, who is now working in the U.S. Department of Energy. And we lost another colleague from a little bit up north of Groton area, who is now a clerk magistrate.
Well, good female talent is obviously recognized, right? That is a good news story.
It is. Yeah. The only downside is we're now down to 59 members in the caucus, and we're expected to about hold stable around there with this election coming up between women who are either running for a different office, at a higher level or in a Senate, and some women who are retiring, such as Senator Harriet Chandler, who has served for a very long time in the Senate. So we'll probably hover about where we are right now. But I think people are always surprised when I tell them that, what my number is. When I came into the legislature, I was number 192. 192nd woman elected to office. And because it's in alphabetical order, you were number 164 and you were number 166,
right. Yeah.
even though you're in the same class. And now there's only 221 women overall since the beginning, compared to the over 20,000 men.
And it's really striking when you think about it in those terms, isn't it?
Because sometimes to us it seems common that there's women there. Right. I mean, we're about 30%. But when you realize that where we're at right now is just so relatively new in terms of, and I always joke, I always tell people that when you go into the private bathrooms off of the chamber, there wasn't a women's room for an extremely long period of time.
I don't think it was there until the 90s.
Right, and they basically took the restroom, divided it in half to give some to the women. But on the marble, they didn't exactly take out the wording. You can literally still see where it says men's restroom. And they kind of put over it in faint writing, like women's restroom. But I laugh every time I go in there because it's a reminder to me that where we're at is not a place all that different from where things were just a while ago. No, we're really, and one of the reasons that I say that is because we worked together on a piece of legislation to really make sure that people in the Commonwealth in particular understand the role of women, particularly as it relates to our country's independence and women's suffrage. And we it took us a while to get it through, but it was also something that we did because we lost one of our colleagues to cancer a couple years ago, Rep. Galen Caridi, who had been the original filer of this legislation, just a lovely, lovely woman who served the Berkshires. And we, in addition to just being great legislation, we also wanted to get it done in her honor. It took us 2 cycles to get through. Last session, we passed it in the House twice, once as a standalone and once an economic development bill, but it never got taken up in the Senate. This session, fortunately, we were able to get it taken up in both houses, and the 3 of us just were at Mechanics Hall in Worcester for that signing ceremony, which was really cool.
Yeah, it was great. Great to have the governor there. It was nice to have a whole great showing of folks who were recognizing the importance of making women's contributions visible. I think the thing that always struck me when we were testifying together on this bill was, you read the history books and you really don't see that many women. And it's not at all because the women weren't contributing. It's just a matter of how you focus that lens, right? Yeah. So this is really, I think, going to be an important piece for Massachusetts and tourists, whether you're in Massachusetts or whether you're from across the country, across the world. As you both know, start in the State House and be able to, take a trail around the Commonwealth where you can see these locations and where they're married with the contributions of these important women and their stories. And then, while we're at it, do some local economic development contributions too. Bring some folks into our communities all across the state. So hugely, exciting opportunity for us.
Exciting, and the legislation created a commission to study what the landmarks and what the trail should consist of, and Representative Kane and I are both going to be serving on that commission. We have our first meeting next week, I think.
Yeah, yep.
Do you have to be a legislator to serve?
I think there are
No, I think there was like 13 like named positions of like who got to appoint somebody. Yeah.
You are looking for something to do on nights and weekends now.
Well, you can send us all the recommendations that you think are.
Well, we might have to have one from Westboro.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the reasons that we held the ceremony at Mechanics Hall was because that just steps away was the site of former Brindley Hall, which was where the first and second National Women's Rights Conventions were held in 1850 and 1851. And as I've said many times, I lived in Shrewsbury almost 25 years before I knew that. Before I knew that is where, and it was only researching for this bill that I discovered that. And I thought, how is that possible? I love history. I've done so much research into this area, and I never knew this. And that really, to me, just said, this is just wrong. Like, everyone around here should know, like, of the historical significance. There were thousands of delegates that came to Worcester in the 1850s who were working on women's rights and women's suffrage. And it took another, 69 years to get it done, or 79 years. But this area played an important role.
And I think it was really interesting, too. It was the governor of all people who noted that day, in the State House in and of itself, there are no paintings of women. Mm-hmm. There are no statues of women. Mm-hmm. There are, we know about the bust of Lafayette, who is the only non-American person to have a bust in the State House. It's in the Senate chamber. It's on the tour. Yeah. But there are literally no statues of women inside that building or paintings of women, with the exception of, I'm assuming, the current lieutenant governor and former Governor Jane Swift.
And that has a real material impact, because when you think about, and I know we've talked about this before, why don't more women run for office? Why aren't women represented in equal numbers to our population in our state houses and Congress? And, young women aspire to things when they can see other women, they're doing those roles. They can imagine and picture themselves in those roles. And so if you don't highlight women in these roles, then you really deprive that next generation of young women from understanding what's possible and understanding, what mentor roles there may be for them to benefit from.
No, I agree. And that was something, and another common thread that we all share is really the importance of sort of women in public service. And, you and I served on the executive board of the Women's Caucus together before you left for many years, working on issues. You are our treasurer of the Women's Caucus, but we worked on the issues with the Mass Commission on Status of Women, making sure their role was supported and elevated. And Danielle, you and I are state directors for Women in Government, the National Foundation, and we have an upcoming conference, I'm excited to say, is going to be in Florida, which will be nice in November. But we do work with women from all across the country. And a couple of years ago, one of our former colleagues, Senator Jen Flanagan, led the committee for the National Women in Government on mental health and what we could do in terms of mental health and substance use. And so we have opportunities to sort of show up in the landscape, working on issues that are critical across the country, but bringing what we've done here in Massachusetts to it. And I get a lot out of those opportunities to be with other women colleagues. I always come home and think that we have it so much better here in Massachusetts. I remember when we were first trying to work on legislation around the opioid epidemic, and I went to one of the Women in Government conferences, and women were saying there from many different states, we can't even get acknowledgement there is an epidemic. We can't get anywhere right now, but you all in Massachusetts have already passed legislation. And it just made me very thankful, to be working in a state where we do come together on a lot of issues, and not in a partisan way, but in a let's bring every idea to the table and figure out how to get this done.
Right. We're a commonwealth. We come together to solve our.
And I find too at those events in particular that we have women coming up. We bring a small group of our legislators, maybe 10 or sometimes fewer than that, depending on the timing, but people from around the country are always coming up to us, asking us, how did you do that? How did you, we're always leading a panel or a discussion. We talked a few years ago about the Alzheimer's bill that we passed here.
that you led on, thankfully.
Well, thank you. And we modeled it for the rest of the country. And then last session with the e-cigarette flavor ban, we're hoping, now that there is some movement nationally with the FDA on the danger of e-cigarettes, especially to our youth,
right,
and the danger of traditional combustible menthol cigarettes as well. So, we have folks approaching us at these events asking us, how do you do it? How do you get it done? I mean, I feel like my staff end up doing the work of some of these folks from around the country, corresponding with them and giving them model legislation so that they can then move forward with some of the things that we've been able to do here. So,
yeah, I think we're really fortunate, and I think it's, again, seeing what the issues are across the country is also eye-opening as well. Mm-hmm. Some things that you see stark differences in approaches to some of the monumental challenges. And sometimes we learn things from other states that they're doing Absolutely. That we haven't, either had an opportunity to do so yet, or we're taking best learnings out of them. So it's a rewarding process overall. But I think, at the end of the day, we all shared a goal. We would get together, as you mentioned earlier, we would go and talk to Girl Scouts in Westboro together and really try to show there are women, serving in public service. It's a noble profession. You think about doing it, but also as a takeaway, it's a collaborative, collegial, and supportive place to serve as a legislator, and in particularly as a female legislator.
And I just want to take a minute to recognize your efforts with the Women's Caucus, because you really have put in a tremendous amount of time kind of framing out and bringing your private sector background to the caucus, getting us organized, which really has created an opportunity for us to move some really important issues to the forefront, including maternal health, maternal justice for environmental justice communities, the Women's History Trail, and creating space to have these conversations around issues that might not otherwise get the attention and the focus that they really deserve. So kudos to you, and thank you for that.
It is a great group, and I think we modeled the way that you can have conversations about things where you might not all be in the same place, and that's the beauty of it, is that everyone's bringing their perspective to the table, and no one's insisting they're right and you're wrong. It's like, here's where I'm at, let's talk about this. And then that is the nature of our caucus, is that we do things where there is agreement on them, where there is bipartisan, bicameral agreement on how to, prioritize issues. And so, I think it's a model for the rest of the legislature and for other legislators in terms of dealing with this. But, I am, as we said, we're so bummed you're not with us full time anymore. But you're a tremendous legislator, a tremendous colleague, and a great friend. And so we're very happy that you are enjoying the private sector. And
with opportunities to still get together like this.
Yes, absolutely. And Danielle, you and I have a future ahead of working together and collaborating, and we'll continue to be grateful for that opportunity as well. So thanks for joining me here today to talk a little bit more about some of the issues that we collaborated on, and to really reflect on the great opportunity we had to represent Westboro together. And it's going to be a new day after this election cycle. But I think we've all been pretty lucky to work together, and thank you guys for being such great colleagues and friends.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, well, join us next time on the next episode of Conversations with Hannah.